I think the takeaways from this budget are, firstly, it delivers a bit of modest economic stimulus, primarily via tax cuts, but also by some very modest revenue measures. It attempts to deliver some reform, primarily aimed at taxation of superannuation, and also what's likely to be a pretty long-lived process to start a more efficient taxation of cross-border trade in services. And lastly, it does all of these things while trying to kind of thread a pretty fine line between these economic pressures on Australia's credit rating, at least from a public relations perspective, and what's likely to be an election that's to be called relatively soon. Look, all budgets to some degree are political, but this budget, I think, just as occurred in an environment which is a bit unusual. We've got a coincident, if you like, aligning of the political cycle, the budget cycle, and the economic cycle in a way which is quite unusual. So the government, I think, has done a few things to try and address these overlapping issues. One is really to pack as much into the budget as it can. Even pre-announced policies have been included to try and give kind of a more credible reform program. Secondly, it's announced a range of reform measures, and you can see this particularly around the company-focused tax cuts that involve very long-lived commitments which may well in fact come outside the forward estimate period, and it's done all of this by also limiting any deterioration in the top-line budget numbers. The government's clearly targeted a couple of measures at what you'd call structural issues. One is around the taxation of superannuation, which in Australia seems to be a constant point of discussion. They've also taken some significant steps towards the taxation of global trade in services. The taxation system is not very well set up to cope with that sector, but I think the reality is actually focus will almost inevitably turn towards the election.